A hospital corridor echoed with late-night footsteps as a bully in a black jacket cornered a young brunette nurse beside the supply room. His voice was loud, cruel, fueled by arrogance and anger. When she tried to walk away, he struck her across the face, sending her sprawling against the wall. The other staff froze, too afraid to move. He thought no one would dare stop him. But just down the hall, a Navy SEAL and his K-9 were watching, and they had seen everything. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story moves you, make sure to subscribe for more powerful tales of courage, loyalty, and hope. The wind cut through the streets of Ridgefield, Oregon, carrying the kind of chill that made even the streetlights seem tired. Inside the county hospital, the hum of fluorescent lights mixed with the low beeps of monitors and the faint smell of antiseptic. It was nearly midnight, and most of the staff had gone home, leaving the night crew to keep the place running. One of them was Ava Miller, the 29-year-old brunette nurse whose calm voice and steady hands had become the glue holding the ward together. She had been on her feet for 10 hours, balancing patient charts and medication rounds, her smile soft but worn. Outside the ER doors, footsteps echoed, a sharp, heavy rhythm that made the air feel colder. Ethan Cole, the 32-year-old construction foreman with the build of a bouncer and the temper to match, filled the doorway in his black jacket, muscles tense beneath the fabric as he pushed his way inside. His voice carried before his body did. "Where's that nurse who thinks she can tell me what to do?" he barked, startling the receptionist. He reeked of whiskey and arrogance, his eyes glassy but full of intent. Ava appeared from the hall, already recognizing the voice. She had treated him 2 nights earlier when he'd better come in with a hand injury from a bar fight. She'd told him he needed stitches and a tetanus shot. He'd told her he didn't take orders from anyone. "Ethan," she said quietly now, trying to keep her tone even, "it's late. You shouldn't be here." He sneered, stepping closer. "Don't tell me what to do. You think because you wear a badge and a scrub top you can talk down to me?" His voice rose with each word until it filled the hallway. A few patients stirred in their rooms. Nurses froze behind doors, unsure whether to step in or stay silent. Ava took a small step back, hands raised. "You need to calm down," she said. "We can talk outside." That was when he swung. The slap cracked through the corridor, echoing against the tile. Ava stumbled into a tray cart, her shoulder slamming into metal. For a heartbeat, everything stopped. The monitors beeped steadily, indifferent. Ethan towered over her, chest heaving, his black jacket catching the harsh glow of the overhead light. "You think you can embarrass me in front of everyone, White?" he spat. "You're nothing here." What neither of them realized was that someone had just walked through the automatic doors. Jack Turner, the 38-year-old Navy SEAL with short-cropped brown hair, had been sitting outside in his truck after dropping off a friend from physical therapy. He'd seen the commotion through the glass and stepped inside, his K-9 partner, Max, a large German shepherd, padding quietly beside him. Jack didn't say anything at first. He just watched. Years of training had taught him to read a scene before entering it. The nurse was hurt, frightened, but composed. The man, Ethan, was losing control. Jack's voice broke the tension like a calm wave against stone. "That's enough." Ethan turned sharply, eyes narrowing. "Who the hell are you?" Jack stepped closer, his presence filling the space without force. "Someone who doesn't like men hitting women." Ethan scoffed, trying to puff himself up. "You don't know me." "I know your type," Jack said evenly. "Now, back up." Ethan's jaw twitched. "Or what? You gonna call security?" "Don't need to," Jack said. His hand rested loosely at his side, but everything about him was coiled precision. Max stood by his leg, tail still, eyes locked on Ethan. The dog's low growl rolled like thunder beneath the surface. "You bring a dog to a hospital?" Ethan snapped, voice cracking. "He's cleaner than you," Jack replied. The tension broke when Ethan lunged. He swung wide, a clumsy punch fueled by ego and liquor. Jack sidestepped easily, catching Ethan's wrist midair and twisting just enough to make him drop to his knees with a strangled grunt. "Stop," Jack said quietly. Ethan strained against his grip, but froze when Max's growl deepened. "You done?" Jack asked. Ethan glared up, red-faced. "You don't know who I am." "Don't care," Jack said, releasing his wrist and stepping back. Ethan stumbled to his feet, clutching his arm. "This isn't over," he hissed. "You'll regret this." He shoved past Jack and stormed out into the cold night. For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of the vents. Ava stood motionless, her cheek already swelling. Jack turned to her. "You okay?" he asked, his voice soft now. She nodded shakily. "I think so. He's just drunk. Angry." Jack frowned. That wasn't anger, that was control. She looked at him, uncertain how to respond. "You're military?" "Was," he said, "retired. Just helping a buddy with rehab tonight." She looked down at Max, who was sitting perfectly still, watching her. "He's beautiful," she said. "He's saved my life more than once," Jack replied. "Guess old habits don't fade?" She smiled faintly, even through the pain. "Thank you." "You don't need to thank me," Jack said, "but you should file a report. Guys like that, they don't stop until someone makes them." Ava sighed. "He's connected around here. His company does half the hospital's maintenance. Nobody wants to cross him." Jack's expression hardened. "Then maybe someone should." He helped her to a chair, his movements careful, almost protective. "You live close?" he asked. "About 15 minutes away," she said. "Don't drive tonight. Get someone to walk you out." "You don't have to." "I'm not asking," Jack said gently. Max followed as they walked her to the parking lot, the night air biting through their clothes. The world was still, the kind of stillness that hides unfinished storms. Ava unlocked her old sedan, her hands trembling. "You think he'll come back?" she asked. Jack looked out toward the empty street. "Men like him don't like being embarrassed. He'll come back. The question is when." She swallowed hard, her breath clouding in the cold. "What do I do?" "You keep doing your job," Jack said. "And if he shows up again, call me." He handed her a small card with his number, the kind that didn't look new but had been used often. "You don't even know me," she said softly. "I don't need to," he said. "You're decent. That's enough." He gave her a small nod and turned to leave, Max pacing beside him. She watched them go, the image of the soldier and his dog fading into the fog beyond the streetlights. Back inside his truck, Jack sat for a long while, watching the hospital from a distance. He didn't believe in coincidence. Something about Ethan's eyes, the kind of empty confidence that only came from unchecked power, told him this was OT over. He reached over and scratched Max's neck. "Looks like we'll be sticking around, buddy," he said. The dog gave a low, approving rumble. Outside, the wind carried the faint hum of the hospital generators and the soft whisper of leaves across the asphalt. Somewhere in that quiet, danger was already moving again. The next morning broke gray and cold over Ridgefield, Oregon. A thin mist hung low across the hospital parking lot, wrapping the town in quiet uncertainty. Inside the nurse's lounge, Ava Miller, the 29-year-old brunette nurse, sat with a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. The bruise on her cheek had darkened overnight, though she had done her best to hide it beneath concealer. She hadn't told anyone the full story of what happened, just that a patient had gotten aggressive. It was easier that way. But word travels fast in small towns, and by the time her shift began, every nurse on the floor knew that Ethan Cole, the bouncer-built man in the black jacket, had finally gone too far. The problem was, no one wanted to be the one to say it out loud. Not when Ethan's construction company held the maintenance contract for half the hospital. Ava tried to focus on her patients, but every sound, a door opening, footsteps in the hall, the squeak of rubber soles on tile, set her nerves on edge. Around noon, she stepped out to the parking lot to catch a breath of air. That's when she saw him. Ethan's black pickup truck sat parked across the street, engine running, smoke curling from the exhaust. He wasn't getting out. He was just watching. Her pulse quickened. She turned back toward the hospital doors, trying to steady her breathing. Inside, her co-worker Maria, a 40-year-old nurse with curly hair and sharp eyes, caught her expression immediately. "What's wrong?" Ava hesitated. "He's here." Maria's face hardened. "Again? I'm calling security." "No," Ava said quickly. "That'll just make it worse." "Worse than this?" Maria shot back. But Ava shook her head, forcing a weak smile. "I'll handle it." Across town, Jack Turner, the 38-year-old Navy SEAL, was out on his morning run with Max, the German Shepherd. The air was crisp, each breath forming clouds as they jogged along the old rail trail. Jack had spent years training for wars overseas, but he found something strangely grounding about the Oregon cold. It made him feel alive in a different way. Max trotted beside him, tongue lolling, fur glinting in the pale light. When Jack's phone buzzed, he almost ignored it, but the number flashing on the screen made him stop. Unknown, local. He answered. "Jack Turner." A shaky voice came through. "It's Ava, from the hospital." Jack slowed, his tone softening. "What's wrong?" "He's back," she whispered. "Outside, just sitting there." Jack's jaw tightened. "I'm on my way." 15 minutes later, his pickup rolled into the hospital lot, tires crunching over the frost. He parked beside Ava's small sedan and scanned the area. Ethan's truck was still across the street, engine idling. The man sat in the driver's seat wearing the same black jacket, sunglasses hiding his eyes. Jack's instincts kicked in immediately. This wasn't just intimidation. This was staging. "Stay inside," he told Ava. "Keep the doors locked." She nodded, voice trembling. "He said I'd regret embarrassing him." "He already does," Jack muttered under his breath. Jack crossed the street calmly, Max trotting close beside him. He stopped a few feet from Ethan's truck, hands in his jacket pockets. "Morning," Jack said evenly. Ethan rolled down the window slowly, smirking. "Oh, it's you? The hero." "You're parked where you don't belong," Jack said. "Hospital's private property." Ethan leaned back in his seat, chuckling. "You a cop now?" "No, just someone who doesn't like seeing good people get threatened." "Good people," Ethan sneered. "That nurse lied about me." "You know what that does to a man's reputation in a town like this?" "You did that to yourself," Jack said quietly. "Now you're going to leave?" Ethan's grin widened. "Or what?" he asked, stepping out of the truck. He was taller up close, built like a man who still thought he was 20. But the alcohol and bitterness had softened the edges. "You gonna sick your mutt on me?" "He's not a mutt," Jack said, "and I don't need him to end this." The standoff drew the attention of a few onlookers through the hospital windows. Ethan took a step closer, pointing a finger at Jack's chest. "You don't know who you're messing with." "I don't need to," Jack said. "I just know what you are." Ethan's smirk faltered, his hand twitching at his side. Jack noticed, the way soldiers do, and shifted his stance slightly. "Last chance," he said. "Leave." Ethan glanced toward the building, saw Ava watching from behind the glass, and his rage flared again. "This isn't over," he spat. "You can't protect her forever." "Watch me," Jack replied. Ethan stepped closer, the space between them electric. Then he lunged, not a punch this time, but a shove, hard enough to make his point. Jack barely moved. He caught Ethan's wrist mid-motion, twisting it down with enough pressure to force him to his knees. Ethan cursed, struggling, but Jack's grip was immovable. Max barked once, loud and sharp, making Ethan flinch. "You done?" Jack asked calmly. "You want to keep pretending you're in control?" Ethan's teeth clenched. "You'll regret this," he hissed again. "You keep saying that," Jack said, "but you're the one who keeps losing." He released him, letting Ethan stumble back toward his truck. "Drive away," Jack said. "Now." Ethan hesitated, chest heaving, eyes full of hate. But he climbed in and tore out of the lot, tires squealing. Ava ran outside just as Jack turned back toward the hospital. "You didn't have to do that," she said, her voice trembling between gratitude and fear. Yeah, he said. I did. He's not going to stop, she said quietly. He's going to come back. Jack looked at her for a long moment. Then we'll be ready. He nodded once, gave a command to Max, and headed back to his truck. The dog looked up at him as if asking if it was over. Not yet, buddy, Jack said, starting the engine. Not yet. By late afternoon, word had spread through town again about the confrontation, about the dog, about the man in the black jacket who'd finally met someone he couldn't scare. But Ethan wasn't finished. He had money, influence, and the kind of pride that refused to die quietly. That evening, in a dim bar on the edge of Ridgefield, he sat nursing another whiskey while two rough-looking men listened to his version of events. He humiliated me, Ethan slurred. In front of everyone, some wannabe soldier and his dog? You think I'm going to let that slide? One of the men grinned, showing a row of bad teeth. You pay? We take care of it. Ethan smiled bitterly. Yeah, let's see how tough he feels when it's 3-on-1. He leaned back, the neon lights painting his face in red and blue. He thinks he's a hero. We'll show him what happens to heroes. Night fell over Ridgefield, the cold air thick with fog that rolled down from the hills. The town street lights glowed weakly through the mist, casting long shadows that stretched across the cracked sidewalks. Jack Turner, the 38-year-old Navy SEAL, stood on his porch polishing the leash of his German Shepherd Max. He couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Years of combat had taught him how to sense when trouble was waiting in the dark, and tonight it lingered like smoke. Max's ears twitched, his gaze fixed toward the distant road. Jack followed the dog's stare and saw headlights cut through the fog, slowing near his driveway before passing. He exhaled quietly. Easy, boy, he murmured, giving the dog's head a reassuring pat. But deep down, he knew that wasn't just a passing car. He'd been watched before by better men than Ethan Cole. At the hospital, Ava Miller, the 29-year-old brunette nurse, was finishing another long shift. The events of the morning still replayed in her mind. The shouting, the shove, the way Jack had stepped in without hesitation. The bruise on her cheek had faded, but the memory hadn't. As she signed out at the nurse's station, Maria, the 40-year-old co-worker with curly hair, leaned close. You sure you're okay walking to your car? She asked. Ava smiled faintly. I'll be fine, but Maria frowned. I heard Ethan was asking about you at the bar again. Ava's stomach turned. He'll get bored, she said, trying to sound confident. Guys like him always do. Maria shook her head. Guys like him don't get bored. They get dangerous. When Ava stepped outside, the parking lot was quiet, the frost on the cars glittering beneath the streetlights. Her breath came out in visible clouds as she walked toward her sedan, keys clutched tightly in her hand. She didn't notice the dark truck parked near the edge of the lot until its engine started. The sound made her freeze. The headlights flicked on, blinding her. Ava, a voice called. It was Ethan, the 32-year-old foreman with a bouncer S build and a black jacket that seemed to swallow the light, stepping out of the truck. We need to talk. She backed away. You're not supposed to be here. Relax, he said, his tone low, almost calm. I just want to make things right. She shook her head. Stay back, Ethan. His grin widened. You embarrassed me twice. Once at the hospital, once in front of half the town. You think you can get away with that? Her pulse quickened. She turned to run, but he grabbed her arm hard enough to make her cry out. Let go, she shouted, struggling against his grip. That's when she heard the sound, a car door slamming in the distance, followed by a sharp whistle. Max's bark broke through the night, deep and commanding. Ethan looked up just in time to see Jack approaching from across the lot, his stride steady, his expression unreadable. I told you to stay away from her, Jack said. This doesn't concern you, Ethan snapped, his grip tightening. It does now, Jack said, his voice dropping lower. Let her go. Ethan hesitated, torn between fear and pride. Or what? You going to hit me in front of your dog? No, Jack said, but he might. He gave a hand signal, and Max growled, muscles tensing. Ethan released Ava immediately, stumbling back. "You think this is over?" he said, backing toward his truck. "I'll ruin you both." Jack took a step closer. "You already did that to yourself." Ethan climbed into his truck and sped off, tires squealing against the frozen asphalt. Ava's hands were shaking. Jack walked over, keeping his tone calm. "You okay?" She nodded weakly. "I didn't know who else to call." "You did the right thing," he said. "He's getting desperate. That makes him sloppy." "He said he'll ruin me," she whispered. Jack looked toward the road where the taillights had vanished. "He's already ruined enough. We'll handle it." She hesitated. "We?" "You're not alone in this anymore," Jack said, giving her a reassuring look. Max pressed against her leg, as if agreeing. Later that night, Jack sat at his kitchen table, an untouched cup of coffee in front of him. He had called Sheriff Dwyer, a 50-year-old lawman with a sharp mind and tired eyes, to report the incident. The sheriff arrived an hour later, his breath fogging in the cold. "You sure you want to get involved in this, Turner?" Dwyer asked, removing his hat. "That guy's connected. His brother-in-law's on the county board." Jack leaned back. "You want me to stand by and let him hurt someone again?" Dwyer sighed. "I didn't say that. I'm just saying he'll push back hard." "Then I'll push harder," Jack said simply. Dwyer studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I'll file the report, but keep your head down. We'll need evidence if we're going to make it stick." Jack gave a short nod. "Understood." After the sheriff left, Jack turned off the lights and stood by the window. The fog had thickened, curling around the porch light like smoke. Max sat at his feet, ears alert. Somewhere in the distance, an engine revved before fading away. Jack's instincts flared again. "They're planning something," he muttered. Max let out a low rumble, as if confirming it. Jack reached down, resting a hand on the dog's head. "We'll be ready." Meanwhile, Ethan sat in a dim warehouse on the outskirts of town, his knuckles white around a bottle of cheap whiskey. Across from him sat the two men he met the night before, locals with records longer than their paychecks. "You sure about this?" one of them asked. Ethan slammed the bottle down. "I'm not letting that wannabe soldier humiliate me again. He wants a fight? I'll bring it to him." He leaned forward, eyes burning. "We'll hit him where it hurts. His house, his car, I don't care. He'll learn what happens when you make me look weak." The men exchanged uneasy glances. "What about the nurse?" "She's part of the lesson," Ethan said coldly. "They both are." By dawn, a new storm was brewing over Ridgefield. The wind had picked up, and the first drops of icy rain tapped against the windows. Jack stood in his living room, loading a duffel bag with essentials, flashlight, first aid kit, extra gear. He didn't know when Ethan would strike, but he knew it would be soon. Max paced by the door, restless. "Yeah," Jack said quietly, "I feel it too." Outside, the clouds thickened, and the town seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next move in a game neither side was willing to lose. The night deepened, and Ridgefield fell into an uneasy quiet. The fog was thicker now, settling over the streets like a shroud. Jack Turner, the 38-year-old Navy SEAL, couldn't sleep. He sat at his kitchen table, the faint glow of a single lamp casting long shadows across the room. His instincts wouldn't let him rest. Years of training had taught him to listen when silence felt wrong. Max, his K9 German Shepherd, lay by the door, awake, his ears twitching at the faintest sound. Jack reached down, scratching the dog's head. Outside, a branch cracked somewhere in the woods. The cold air stung his face, and for a moment he stood still, eyes scanning the tree line. Across town, the hospital glowed faintly against the darkness. Ava Miller, the 29-year-old fair-skinned brunette nurse, sat in the staff lounge long after her shift should have ended. She couldn't bring herself to leave just yet. She had told the sheriff everything, filed her statement, and done what she was supposed to, but it didn't feel over. Maria, her 40-year-old co-worker, appeared at the door, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You're still here?" she said softly. Ava smiled faintly. Couldn't sleep anyway. Maria sat beside her. You know, when my ex used to scare me, I'd always tell myself that the worst part wasn't the yelling. It was waiting for it to start again. Ava nodded. I keep looking over my shoulder. Every sound feels like him. Maria placed a hand on her arm. He's not coming back tonight, and even if he does, he'll find you're not alone anymore. In a small diner across town, Ethan Cole, the 32-year-old foreman, built like a bouncer and wearing his black jacket, sat in a corner booth, jaw tight. The waitress poured him coffee, but didn't make conversation. Everyone in Ridgefield had heard by now what he'd done. The whispers were everywhere, and the sideways glances cut deeper than any insult. He muttered under his breath, "They think they can make me the villain." His two drinking buddies from the warehouse sat across from him, nervously exchanging looks. "Ethan," one said carefully, "maybe you should lay low. Cops are watching you, man." Ethan's hand slammed against the table, rattling the silverware. "You think I care about cops? That ex-soldier humiliated me, made me look weak. You don't come back from that." He leaned back, his heavy frame filling the booth, black jacket creasing as his fists clenched. "I'll show them who's weak." He threw some bills on the table, storming out into the night, the diner's bell jingling behind him. The two men exchanged glances again. Neither followed. By midnight, the fog was thick as smoke. Jack stood at the edge of his property, flashlight in hand, scanning the dirt road. He thought he heard something, a crunch of gravel too deliberate to be wind or animal. Max's growl confirmed it. Big and slow. The beam of a cigarette glowed in the dark, then faded. Jack waited until the footsteps were gone before rising. "Testing boundaries," he muttered. Coward. He went back inside, double-checking the locks, the sound of the night closing in around him. Max sat by the window, refusing to lie down. Jack looked out into the dark again. He'll come. He just doesn't know when to quit. The next morning dawned gray and heavy. The town's stillness was unnerving, as though everyone was waiting for something to happen. At the sheriff's office, Sheriff Dwyer reviewed reports while rubbing his temple. He didn't like the feeling of the case, too personal, too unpredictable. He picked up the phone and called Jack. "You sleep at all?" he asked. "Not much," Jack replied. "He's out there." "I know," Dwyer said. "We've got patrols running past the hospital and your place, but if he wants to make trouble, he'll find a way." "Then I'll be waiting," Jack said. Dwyer sighed. "I don't suppose I can convince you to stay out of it." "You could try," Jack said, ending the call. Ava woke late that morning, her stomach tight with unease. The sunlight filtering through her curtains felt harsh, unwelcome. She dressed quickly and drove to the small grocery store downtown. Inside, she caught sight of Ethan's truck parked across the street. Her heart leapt into her throat. She ducked behind a shelf, peering through the glass doors. He wasn't alone. Two men stood by the truck, laughing, smoking, their eyes scanning the lot. Ava backed away slowly, her pulse hammering in her ears. She slipped out the back exit and hurried to her car, hands trembling as she turned the key. She didn't go home. She drove straight to the sheriff's office. "Deputy," she said, breathless. "He's downtown, right now." The deputy radioed it in, and within minutes, Dwyer was already in motion. "Tell Jack," the sheriff barked. "He'll want to know." By the time Jack reached Main Street, Ethan was gone. Only tire marks and cigarette butts remained. Jack knelt beside them, scanning the ground. "They're circling her," he muttered. "Trying to scare her first?" He looked up at Dwyer. "This ends soon." Dwyer nodded grimly. "One way or another." That evening, Jack went to the hospital, waiting in the parking lot until Ava finished her shift. When she stepped out, he approached her quietly. "You saw him?" he asked. She nodded. "I don't think he knows I went to the sheriff." "Good," Jack said. "That means he'll get careless." "I don't want anyone else getting hurt," she whispered. Jack looked at her steadily. "You won't be the one getting hurt. Not while I'm here." Max barked once, softly, as if to agree. They walked to her car together, the air cold enough to frost their breath. "He's out there," Ava said. "He's always out there." Jack nodded slowly. Not for much longer. As she drove away, Jack stood in the glow of the streetlight, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the horizon where the fog had begun to creep back in. Somewhere beyond that mist, Ethan Cole was already planning his next move, and Jack Turner, calm and ready, was already waiting for him. The morning light struggled to break through the clouds hanging over Ridgefield. Rain turned the streets slick, and a pale haze settled across the valley. At the county hospital, Ava Miller, the 29-year-old brunette nurse, moved through her shift with an unease she couldn't shake. Every sound seemed sharper, every shadow longer. The police had taken her statement, but she knew Ethan Cole wasn't the kind of man to give up after a warning. As she checked a patient's IV, her phone buzzed with a number she didn't recognize. She hesitated, then answered. Ava Miller. Silence. Then a voice she knew all too well. You really think your soldier can protect you forever? Ethan's tone was cold, steady. You think hiding behind him makes you safe? Ava's throat tightened. Leave me alone, Ethan. You humiliated me, he said. Now it's your turn. The line went dead. Ava stood frozen for a moment, heart hammering, before rushing to the nurse's station. Maria, she said breathlessly. He called. He's watching me. Maria's face drained of color. We're calling the sheriff. Across town, Jack Turner, the 38-year-old Navy SEAL, was in his garage checking the locks on his truck when his phone rang. Sheriff Dwyer's voice came through. Jack, we've got a problem. That guy Cole's on the move. We found his truck parked 2 blocks from the hospital. Jack's expression hardened. I'm heading there. Wait, Dwyer warned. We've got deputies en route. Don't do anything stupid. Jack's tone didn't change. He put his hands on her twice. He won't get a third chance. By the time Jack and Max reached the hospital, the rain had turned into a fine mist. The parking lot was nearly empty except for a few scattered cars and an old maintenance van near the side entrance. Max's ears perked immediately, nose twitching. Jack followed his gaze. The van's side door was cracked open and movement flickered inside. Jack's pulse slowed, a sure sign that his body had shifted into focus mode. He crouched low, giving a silent hand signal. Max crept forward, silent as a shadow. Jack approached from the other side, his boots barely making a sound against the wet asphalt. Inside the hospital, Ava stood near the nurse's station, staring out the window. She caught sight of the van, her stomach twisting. He's here, she whispered. Maria moved beside her. I'm calling security. No, Ava said quickly. They'll get caught in the middle. She turned toward the hall, already moving. Ava, Maria called after her, but she was gone. Outside, Jack reached the van just as the side door swung open. Ethan stepped out, wearing the same black jacket, his face twisted with anger. 2 men followed, both strangers, rough and ready. You just don't know when to quit, Jack said evenly. Ethan grinned. You think you scared me last time? I brought help. The first man lunged, but Jack sidestepped, catching him by the wrist and driving his shoulder into the man's chest with a single practiced motion. The man hit the ground hard, gasping for air. The second swung a tire iron, grazing Jack's arm, but Max was faster. The dog leapt, teeth clamping down on the man's forearm, dragging him backward into the mud. He screamed, dropping the weapon as Jack turned back to Ethan. You sure you want to keep going? Jack said. You don't get to walk away this time, Ethan snarled. He rushed forward, swinging wildly. Jack blocked the first hit, ducked the second, and landed a clean strike to Ethan's ribs. Ethan stumbled, slipping in the rain. Jack grabbed his jacket, shoving him against the van. You're done? Jack said through clenched teeth. You want to keep hurting people? You can answer to me first. Ethan tried to push back, but Jack pinned him there until the sound of sirens grew louder. Ava burst through the side doors, stopping at the sight before her. Rain poured over the scene, 2 men on the ground, Max standing guard, and Jack holding Ethan by the collar. Sheriff Dwyer's cruiser pulled up moments later, lights flashing red and blue through the mist. Step back, the sheriff called. Jack released Ethan, letting him drop into the mud. Dwyer moved in quickly, cuffing Ethan, while deputies detained the other two men. "You're under arrest for assault, harassment, and trespassing," Dwyer said flatly. Ethan spat in the dirt, glaring up at Jack. "This isn't over." Jack looked down at him, calm and unflinching. "Yeah, it is." As deputies loaded Ethan into the cruiser, Ava approached Jack. Her hands were trembling, her eyes wide with exhaustion and relief. "You saved me again," she said quietly. Jack shook his head. "No, you saved yourself. You called for help. That's what got him caught." She managed a small smile. "You really think he'll stay locked up?" "Long enough," Jack said. "And if he doesn't, he'll find I'm not hard to find." He gave Max a pat. The dog wagged his tail once, eyes bright despite the rain. Sheriff Dwyer walked over, rubbing the back of his neck. "You've got good timing, Turner. You and that dog of yours make a hell of a team." "We try," Jack said. "Just doing what's right." Back inside, Ava sat on the edge of a hospital bed as Maria wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. "It's over now," Maria whispered. Ava nodded, staring out the window where the rain continued to fall. Outside, Jack stood with Max beside his truck, watching as Ethan's cruiser disappeared down the highway. The night had finally quieted, but the tension in his chest hadn't lifted. Max nudged his leg softly, and Jack knelt to scratch behind his ear. "You did good, boy," he murmured. "Real good." By morning, word had spread across Ridgefield. The bully in the black jacket had finally been taken down, and the nurse he'd tormented was safe. For the first time in weeks, the hospital felt calm again. When Ava arrived for her next shift, a few patients smiled, and even the reception staff seemed lighter. She caught sight of Jack's truck in the distance as she walked in, parked near the edge of the lot. He wasn't inside, but she knew he'd be around, somewhere nearby, keeping watch. She smiled softly, feeling for the first time in a long while that she wasn't alone. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Jack and Max stood overlooking the quiet town from a ridge outside the valley. "Guess we bought them some peace," Jack said, voice low. Max sat beside him, ears flicking at the sound of distant wind. Jack looked down at the dog, a faint smile crossing his face. "Come on, partner," he said. "Let's head home." Together they turned back toward the road, the last light of day catching the wet pavement as Ridgefield exhaled, a town finally free from the shadow of one man's cruelty. By early summer, Ridgefield had settled into a rare kind of calm, the kind that comes only after a storm has burned itself out. The air was warmer now, carrying the scent of pine and wet soil, and the town looked brighter beneath the Oregon sun. Jack Turner, the 38-year-old Navy SEAL, had taken to working on an old motorcycle he found rusting behind a barn. He spent his mornings tinkering in the shade of his cabin's porch, Max, his German shepherd, lying in the grass nearby, watching every move. The steady rhythm of ordinary life had started to feel natural again, though Jack never fully let his guard down. Some habits, he knew, were too deeply carved into the soul. One afternoon, as he tightened a bolt on the bike, he heard a familiar voice call from the road. "You're really turning into a small-town mechanic." Ava Miller, the 29-year-old brunette nurse, stood by the fence, holding a paper bag that smelled of cinnamon. "Coffee and pastries," she said, "in case you forget to eat again." Jack smirked. "You trying to keep me in shape or fatten me up?" "A bit of both," she said, stepping closer. Max bounded over to greet her, tail wagging. "At least someone's happy to see me," she laughed, scratching behind his ears. They sat on the porch, coffee steaming between them as the breeze carried the sound of the river below. Ava looked out at the horizon, thoughtful. "You ever think about what would be happen if you hadn't been there that night?" Jack took a slow sip before answering. "No," he said. "I learned a long time ago not to dwell on what-ifs. You do what's right when it comes, and you live with it." She nodded, though her eyes lingered on him. "You make it sound easy." "It's not," he said. "It's just simple." They sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that didn't feel empty. "I've been thinking of taking a few days off," Ava said eventually. Drive out to the coast, maybe. I haven't seen the ocean in years." Jack smiled faintly. "It's worth the drive. Peaceful this time of year." She looked at him sideways. "You should come." He hesitated, caught off guard. "You don't sit still for long, do you?" "Neither do you," she countered. He chuckled. "You've got me there." The following week, they drove out together, Ava behind the wheel, Jack riding shotgun, Max in the back seat, head poking out the window. The winding road through the hills opened up to the rugged Oregon coastline, waves crashing against cliffs that stretched for miles. They stopped near a quiet beach, the air heavy with salt and wind. Max leapt from the car, racing down the sand, his paws kicking up sprays of white foam. Ava laughed as she ran after him. The sound of her joy carried over the waves. Jack watched her for a moment before following, the surf soaking the cuffs of his jeans. They walked for hours, talking about everything and nothing, the past, the future, and all the empty spaces between. As the sun began to set, Ava turned to him, her hair whipping in the wind. "You ever think about starting over?" she asked. Jack looked at her, the dying light reflecting in his eyes. "I think that's what we're doing," he said. She smiled softly. "Maybe you're right." They drove back to Ridgefield that night under a blanket of stars. The road was quiet, the hum of the tires lulling Max to sleep in the back. Ava glanced over at Jack, his face half lit by the dashboard glow. "You know," she said, "people talk about you in town." "Do they?" he asked. "Yeah," she said. "They say you're the kind of man who shows up when it matters most." He smiled faintly. "Let's hope I don't have to again." "You will," she said quietly. "That's who you are." He didn't argue. The drive home passed in comfortable silence, broken only by the rhythm of the road and the occasional sigh from Max. Then one evening, as Jack was closing the workshop for the night, his phone buzzed. It was Sheriff Dwyer. "Sorry to bother you, Turner," the sheriff said. "You might want to hear this. Cole escaped transport near Eugene this morning. State police are on it, but—" "He'll come back," Jack finished, his voice low. "You think?" "I know," Jack said. He hung up, staring out into the darkening woods. Max stood at attention beside him, already sensing the shift in mood. Jack crouched, resting a hand on the dog's shoulder. "Looks like peace was short-lived, partner." Max growled softly, as if ready for whatever came next. By the next morning, word had spread. The sheriff increased patrols, and the hospital boosted security. Ava tried to stay calm, but fear crept back into her chest like a cold wind. "He won't come here," Maria told her. "He's not that stupid." But Ava wasn't so sure. That evening she left the hospital late. The parking lot was quiet, the air heavy with the scent of rain. She fumbled for her keys, glancing over her shoulder, every shadow feeling alive. Then, in the reflection of her car window, she saw him, a familiar figure in a black jacket, standing under the flickering streetlight. Her heart stopped. Before she could scream, a sharp whistle cut through the air. Max came charging from the darkness, barking furiously. Jack was right behind him, moving fast. "Ava, get down!" he shouted. Ethan spun around, his 30-year-old bouncer S frame shifting beneath his black jacket. But he was still too slow to stop what was coming. Max lunged, knocking him backward as Jack closed the distance, grabbing him by the collar. "It's over," Jack said, his voice cold and steady. "You don't get another chance." The fight was brief, brutal, and final. Within minutes, sirens wailed again through Ridgefield, painting the night in blue and red. As deputies hauled Ethan away, soaked and defeated, Ava stood trembling beside Jack. "You saved me again," she whispered. "No," he said softly. "This time we saved each other." When the cruisers finally left, Jack and Ava stood together in the empty lot. Max sat between them, panting, his tail sweeping the wet pavement. The rain began to fall again, light and steady. Jack looked up at the sky, then at her. "It's over now," he said. She nodded, tears mixing with the rain. "For good this time." He gave a faint smile. "For good." As they walked away, the first light of dawn began to break over Ridgefield, cutting through the mist. For the first time, it felt like the town could finally rest. The following days brought a silence over Ridgefield that felt different this time, deeper, steadier, and earned. The story of Ethan Cole's final arrest spread quickly, but it wasn't told with fear anymore. It was told with relief. The man in the black jacket, who had terrorized a small town, who had hurt and threatened and controlled, was gone for good. Sheriff Dwyer confirmed it himself. Multiple witnesses, undeniable evidence, and a parole violation meant that Ethan wouldn't see daylight for decades. The town exhaled as if it had been holding its breath for years. At the hospital, life returned to its fragile normalcy. Patients smiled when they saw Ava Miller again, her laughter returning like sunlight after a long storm. She worked harder than ever, not just because she wanted to forget, but because she wanted to prove, to herself and everyone else, that courage wasn't about fighting back once. It was about showing up again the next day. Every time she passed through the corridors that used to echo with fear, she stood a little taller. The nurses whispered sometimes about how she'd survived it all, and about the quiet man and his dog who had made sure justice came when the system hesitated. Ava didn't correct them. She just smiled. Some legends were better left to grow on their own. Jack Turner, the 38-year-old Navy SEAL, didn't seek the attention either. He spent his mornings walking Max along the ridge, the crisp Oregon wind carrying the scent of pine through the air. The river had thawed by now, and sunlight danced across the water like a promise of peace. Jack wasn't used to staying in one place for so long, but Ridgefield had given him something no battlefield ever had, a reason to rest. He'd fixed the leaks in his roof, built a new fence, and even started volunteering at a local youth center. The kids called him Mr. Jack and begged to play fetch with Max after class. Sometimes he'd catch himself smiling without realizing it. It still surprised him how easy it was to care again. Max had changed too, less guarded, more playful. The townsfolk had adopted him as one of their own, sneaking him treats whenever they passed. Every so often Sheriff Dwyer would stop by for coffee and a chat, half joking that Ridgefield hadn't seen this much peace in years. Jack would always shrug, pretending it was nothing. But inside, he knew that peace wasn't something you found. It was something you earned. One crisp afternoon, Ava drove up the dirt road to Jack S. cabin with a basket in her lap and a nervous smile on her face. "You never come into town anymore," she said, as she stepped out of the car. "I figured I'd bring town to you." Jack looked up from his workbench, grease smudged on his hands, and smiled faintly. "You didn't have to." "I know," she said, handing him the basket. "But I wanted to." Max barked once, circling her legs before sitting patiently by her side. "You spoil him," Jack said, eyeing the dog treats poking out of the basket. "He deserves it," she replied. "You both do." They sat together on the porch watching the sunlight filter through the tall trees. For a while, neither spoke. The quiet wasn't heavy anymore. It was comfortable. "You ever think about what's next?" Ava asked. Jack leaned back, eyes on the horizon. "I stopped planning a long time ago," he said. "Plans never survived the first hit." She smiled softly. "That sounds like a soldier answer." "It's a human one," he said. "I think sometimes the best thing you can do is stay where life still feels honest." Ava nodded. "I think you're right." They talked for a while about small things, the hospital renovations, the new community garden, the sheriff's attempts at fishing. Eventually, the sun began to dip low behind the mountains, painting the sky in streaks of gold and violet. "You know," Ava said quietly, "I never got the chance to ask you something." Jack glanced at her. "What's that? Why did you come inside that night? The first time? You could have just kept walking." Jack looked down for a moment before answering. "Because I've seen what happens when good people look away," he said softly. "And because I promised myself after the last tour that I'd never let silence win again." Ava's eyes glistened. "You kept that promise." He gave a faint smile. "Maybe, but I didn't do it alone." Max barked once, almost on cue, and they both laughed. The moment broke the heaviness that hung between them, leaving only warmth. The wind carried the smell of rain from the west, and the trees rustled softly as the sky darkened. Later that evening, Ava stood by her car, reluctant to leave. The headlights cast long shadows across the driveway, the air cool and still. "You should come by the hospital sometime," she said. "You'd be surprised how many people owe you thanks." Jack shook his head lightly. "They don't owe me anything." "That's not how gratitude works," she said. "It's not about owing. It's about remembering." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Maybe I'll stop by one of these days." She smiled, opening the car door. "I'll hold you to that." As she drove away, Jack stood watching until her taillights disappeared into the trees. The sound of the engine faded, replaced by the whisper of the forest. Max stood beside him, quiet and alert. "You think we're finally done, partner?" Jack asked softly. Max tilted his head, tail wagging once. Jack smiled. "Yeah, me too." That night, the rain came, soft, steady, cleansing. Jack lay awake for a while, listening to it tap against the roof. It was the same sound he'd heard in places far from home, but it meant something different now. It wasn't the sound of waiting for danger. It was the sound of peace. He thought about the nurse with the soft voice and steady hands, the one who'd faced fear and refused to let it define her. He thought about the town that had learned to stand tall again. And for the first time, he allowed himself to believe that maybe the war inside him was finally over. When he closed his eyes, he wasn't haunted by memories anymore. He was surrounded by the quiet hum of life returning to what it should be, a rhythm of breath, rain, and the steady heartbeat of a town that had learned through pain what it truly meant to be safe. By autumn, Ridgefield had become almost unrecognizable from the town it had been a year ago. The streets were cleaner, the hospital busier, and laughter filled the diner again. There was still the faint whisper of what had happened, the story of the nurse, the bully, the Navy SEAL, and his loyal dog, but it had faded into something else, a legend told with pride instead of fear. People said justice had finally found its place in Ridgefield, carried on the shoulders of a man who never asked for thanks. Jack Turner, the 38-year-old Navy SEAL, didn't think of himself that way. To him, it was just what needed to be done. He woke up each morning to the smell of wet pine and the sound of Max padding softly across the floorboards. The days were quiet now, filled with simple things: fixing fences, helping Sheriff Dwyer, train new deputies, or watching the river as it glimmered under the changing sky. Sometimes he wondered if this peace would last. But then he'd look around, the calm streets, the laughter of kids playing by the general store, the gentle hum of life returning, and realize that maybe finally it would. One late afternoon, as golden leaves drifted across his porch, he heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Ava Miller, the 29-year-old brunette nurse, who had once lived every day in fear, stepped out of her car holding 2 mugs of coffee and a small box tied with twine. "You're a hard man to find, you know that," she said, smiling. Jack grinned faintly. "Didn't know I was hiding." "You always are," she said. She handed him one of the coffees and set the box down on the porch rail. Inside were 2 hand-stitched patches, one with a symbol of the medical cross, the other with a paw print and the words, "For service beyond duty." "They're from the hospital staff," she said. "We wanted to thank you." Jack turned the patches over in his hands, touched by the simple gesture. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," Ava said softly, "but we wanted to remember." They sat together on the porch, the smell of coffee mingling with the crisp autumn air. Max lay beside them, chin resting on his paws, eyes half closed in the sunlight. "Feels like a long time ago," Ava said. "That night at the hospital, the fear, the noise, it almost feels like it happened to someone else." "That's how healing works," Jack said. "It doesn't erase the scars. It just teaches you how to live with them." She smiled faintly. "You sound like someone who knows." "I've had practice," he said. "Too much of it." She laughed quietly, then grew serious. You ever think about what's next for you? This, he said simply, gesturing toward the cabin, the woods, the quiet town below. I think this is what's next. You don't miss the old life? No, he said after a pause. Out there every day was survival. Here, it's living. They sat in silence, watching the light shift through the trees. You changed this town, Jack, Ava said softly. You gave us back our courage. He shook his head. You did that yourselves. I just reminded you that you already had it. She smiled and looked away, blinking against the sun. The wind carried the faint scent of rain, and the leaves rustled like whispers of something long forgotten. Later that evening, Jack drove down to the river with Max riding in the passenger seat, head out the window. The sky had turned a deep shade of violet, the first stars beginning to appear. He parked by the old dock, stepping out into the cool air. The water flowed steadily, catching the fading light. Max trotted ahead, tail wagging as he sniffed the edge of the dock before sitting beside him. Jack stood there for a long while, breathing in the stillness. You know, he said quietly, I think we did all right. Max gave a low bark in agreement. Maybe it's time to stop running, Jack continued. Time to stay. The dog looked up at him, eyes steady, as if he understood every word. Jack knelt and scratched behind his ears. You've earned some rest too, partner. They stayed like that as the last of the light slipped behind the hills, and for the first time, Jack felt something he hadn't known he was missing: belonging. A few days later, the hospital held a small ceremony in the courtyard. The staff had planted a tree in memory of those who had endured hardship and found strength again. Ava gave a short speech, her voice trembling with emotion. There was a time when fear ruled this place, she said. But courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just one person deciding to stand up when no one else will. Her eyes found Jack in the small crowd. He gave her a nod, his usual quiet acknowledgement, while Max sat obediently at his side. The applause that followed wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was sincere, filled with gratitude that went beyond words. That evening, Jack returned to his cabin, where the sky glowed orange with the last light of day. He built a fire, poured a cup of coffee, and sat by the window, watching the smoke curl into the night. Max lay nearby, already asleep, his breathing steady. Jack thought about everything that had happened, the pain, the fear, the fight, and the peace that followed. It struck him how life always seemed to circle back to moments like this, quiet, unremarkable, but full of meaning. He had spent years chasing battles that never ended, but here, in this small town with its bruised heart and healing spirit, he'd found the one fight that mattered, the fight to protect what is good and keep it standing. He took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the fire, the comfort of the dog's presence, and the rare stillness of a mind finally at ease. We did good, Max, he said softly. Real good. Outside, the wind stirred the trees, whispering through the pines. It wasn't the sound of danger anymore. It was the sound of life moving forward. In the weeks that followed, the rhythm of Ridgefield continued as it always had, but now it carried a quiet pride. People nodded to each other on the streets, the sheriff still tipped his hat, and the hospital glowed each night like a beacon of resilience. Ava often stopped by the cabin on weekends, bringing food or conversation, never staying too long, but always leaving something behind, a sense of warmth, of connection, of hope. One morning, as the first frost of winter dusted the fields, Jack stood on his porch with Max beside him. The sun rose over the ridge, painting the valley in gold. He looked out at the world and felt nothing but peace. Another day, partner, he said, his breath visible in the cold air. Max wagged his tail once, ready as ever. Together they walked down the dirt path toward town, where life waited, not with battles to fight, but with moments to live. For the first time in a long time, Jack Turner wasn't a soldier anymore. He was home. If this story of courage and redemption touched your heart, please share it so others can remember that real strength often speaks in quiet actions, not loud words.